Is this the future of traditional publishing? Is this what I'm going to talk about today, right now in this video? Is this going to change traditional publishing forever? Maybe, maybe not, but you knew I had to use a catchy title to get you here. I am Liselle Sambury. I'm a traditionally published author. I talk on my channel about traditional publishing, writing, and a little bit of reading. And today I wanted to talk about something I very recently found out about, which is the Bindery. So this is a new publishing house that describes itself as Patreon meets publishing. So it's not just a publishing house, but it is also doing a membership-based sort of thing. And they are having these tastemakers, and the tastemakers have their own imprints, and they are content creators within the bookish space that are then going to choose these books that are going to get published along with their membership community. So I find this to be something really interesting in the traditional publishing space. I love to discover and to speculate about things that pop up that are brand new. And so that's what this video is all going to be about. I'm going to talk about everything we know about the Bindery thus far. I'm going to talk about the ways that I see it as being similar or different from typical traditional publishing, based on my experience with the big 5 publishers and publishing books. I have 4 traditionally published books, and then I'm going to talk about some potential outcomes that I see coming from this, and then just kind of some general thoughts about it. And so that's what this video is going to be all about. I will have timestamps below if you want to jump around. I will also have links below, because pretty much all of my information that I'm getting on this is from Publishers Weekly, a Publishers Weekly article from the Bindery website itself, and also from some of the things that the tastemakers / content creators have posted on their own social media platforms. So I will link some of those things below if you want to check those out yourself. So let's go ahead and get started. Starting with, what is the Bindery? So the Bindery is a startup founded by Matt Kay and Meg Harvey. They are going to be publishing both print and ebooks, and they're going to be publishing these books from influencer-led imprints. And so they have these content creators. They are launching with 9 of them. They said they're going to give us more information about each of the imprints in August. I don't know when in August, but sometime in August. And so each of these content creators, they're calling them tastemakers, and so they lead their own imprints, and so they have their own community in which they are picking which books are going to get published alongside their community. So their community is getting an insider view into that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but that is basically the setup of it. And there are kind of 2 distinct components of this startup or this company. And this is why I'm not necessarily calling it a publishing house, because it's a bit of both. So it has this Patreon community type of section to it, and then the other section is the actual kind of publishing house section. And so I'm going to break those into kind of 2 parts, and I'm going to talk about the Patreon community bit first, and then I'm going to talk about the publishing bit. So this community part of it is kind of like a social media platform in a way, so people can make posts and comments and that sort of thing. I'm unclear as to whether you can do this both unpaid and paid, or if this is kind of a paid only community thing for everyone. But it kind of seems like it's leaning to the paid only community bit, but I was kind of not super clear on it, so I will make that known. But in this exclusive community that you have this shoppable bookshelf. So they say it connects to your social media to books that you've discussed. But essentially it's shoppable. You get affiliate commissions from this, and the creators are getting 100% of those affiliate commissions. And so that they have that bookshelf portion, and then they also have the other portion, which is kind of this exclusive Patreon members experience, in which you're kind of sharing whatever exclusive content you want to share with members. And this is different than the actual imprint section, because creators have to reach 500 members before they are able to be an imprint and have an imprint. And so this is why I have that question of, I'm not sure if it those are like free members or a mix of free and paid, or if those are all paid members. But once you have 500 of those members, then you can start your own imprint, which means that you can pick books and that you want to publish. You can start publishing them. You can share exclusive things with your community. And for the launch of, I'm moving over so I can put something over here on the screen. So for the launch, they're launching with 9 tastemakers already in place. So obviously these people haven't met the 500 member threshold or anything like that, but they are launching them and they will have all of their own imprints. I want to also add that it was really cool to see this kind of list of tastemakers pop up, because I was like, oh, I know people. Like, it was really cool to like see creators who I follow and whose like content I really enjoy. As like a reader, I'm not trying to the author space thing, but anyway, it was really fun to like see recognizable faces and to be like, oh, that's really cool. Like, I'm really curious about their tastes and like what they're going to be publishing. I thought that was really cool right off the bat. And so once you have your own imprint, you are able to share a bunch of exclusive behind the scenes content with your members. Multiple TikToks / social media from some of the tastemakers has said that their members will have a hand in which books are getting picked, exclusive content related to the books. Not quite sure what those will be, but they mentioned author interviews. One also mentioned special editions, possibly having access to those as well. And so those are some of the exclusive content things that you can get as a member. For membership, they've announced that they are going to have 3 tiers. So there's a $5 tier, a $12 tier, and a $25 tier. I'm moving over again. They showed you like a small preview photo of what kind of the lowest tier looks like. So they mention also that you will have access to an ebook copy of all of the books that are published from that imprint. So I imagine that if you go up on higher tiers, you'll get things like print copies and like maybe those special editions. And then you also have access to that publishing sort of decision making, as well as that exclusive bonus content. And the creators, so the tastemakers, are getting 50% of that membership revenue. And then the other 50% of that membership revenue is going to basically the publishing side of it. So it's going to the author advance, it's going to marketing, it's going to publicity, it's going to the printing and the editorial services. So the creator, the tastemaker rather, that is executing that membership bit is getting quite a big chunk of that. And then the other chunk is what is driving and funding that publishing end. They're going to be offering a standard advance of $10,000, and the royalty rate breakdown on that, as evidenced in this nice little chart they put together, is 50% royalties to the author, 25% to the bindery, and 25% to the tastemaker. They don't make that clear how that's split up between print and ebook, but that is going to be the royalty rate that they're going forward with. The editorial and design, and I assume also the marketing and publicity, they don't say so explicitly, but I assume also that will be done by Girl Friday Productions. I found it very difficult to like parse what exactly Girl Friday Productions is, but they are the parent company of a hybrid publisher called Girl Friday Books, and so they do publish books, and so they publish YA, adult, nonfiction, and fiction. I didn't recognize any of their titles personally, but that doesn't mean anything. I don't know every book in the world, but that is who will basically be acting as the publisher, doing kind of the publishing bits of it, even though the bindery is the one that the author has the contract with, but Girl Friday will be carrying out all of those, I guess, sort of publishing duties of editorial and production, etc. And it'll be distributed through Ingram's Two Rivers distribution. I don't really know a lot about different sort of distribution types, but according to them, that is a very large distributor. So that is who will be distributing their books. Now I'm going to chat about how this is set up, how the bindery is set up. How is it the same or different from what we might know as kind of typical traditional publishing? I will say that my experience in traditional publishing is with the big five. I don't really have any knowledge or like much knowledge really on how indie presses work. I'm also familiar with some of the like non-big five publishers that are considered larger publishers like Scholastic and Source Books and things like that. So I'm speaking from that experience just so you kind of have that idea. But before I get into all that, I did want to talk a little bit about the founders of the Bindery, so Matt Kay and Meg Harvey. So they both have traditional publishing backgrounds. So Matt Kay worked in marketing at a few major publishers, and he also, like, kind of notably that I thought was interesting and kind of, to me, explained some of the setup of the Bindery, worked in senior positions in production for both Amazon Books and Patreon. And so it kind of makes sense to me, seeing as this kind of is that sort of Patreon publishing marriage. And Meg Harvey worked in editorial at a publisher called Brooks and Mayer rather. I couldn't find a lot about them. It seems like they might be closed now, but it seemed like they maybe were an imprint of Simon & Schuster, but I'm not 100% sure about that, so don't super quote me on it. And if you know better, let me know in the comments. And she also worked at Girl Friday Productions as a chief strategist. And so that is, I can see the Girl Friday Productions connection there. They also say they have an advisory board with 6 members, and one of the members of the advisory board is the former HarperCollins CEO, Jane Friedman. So just to kind of set the stage in their, like, traditional publishing experience and, like, kind of where they're coming from, because I thought it was interesting given how the Bindery is being set up to see those kind of connections between the founders. To begin, this setup of having literary agent submissions, like having only submissions from literary agents, is very common in traditional publishing. Not every traditional publisher does this. Some of them do accept unsolicited submissions, but certainly, like, it's very par for the course for the big 5 to require literary agents to submit work. But it is very interesting that they're putting together this catalog to send over to literary agents. It's kind of, I suppose, in a way, hopping over the agent editor sort of relationship, because how it generally works is, like, agents are aware of editors and their imprints and kind of what they're interested in and what they're looking for, and that, to my understanding, is kind of just like an experience on the job based thing that they learn over time, and they create those relationships over time. And so that's kind of how they're deciding who to send their work to, who to submit their author's work to, whereas the Bindery is kind of, in a way, sort of hopping over that and just kind of being like, these are our imprints, this is what we want, here you go, you have access to it, and you can kind of decide to submit to us from there. Which I do think is interesting, but I also think makes sense, because the tastemakers are the ones that are kind of choosing the book, but who is going to be editorially working on the book is actually going to be a different person, because it's going to be someone from Girl Friday Productions. I'm going to talk more about that later, but that is something that is, like, kind of similar to typical traditional publishing, but then also kind of not. Having a base level advance that is, like, very public is also, like, to my experience, very different. Traditional publishers tend to be very kind of secretive about their advances that they're giving out, and that's why we have things like Publishing Paid Me, where people kind of talked openly about that. Some publishers also have clauses in their contracts that kind of say you can't say your advance, things like that. So it is interesting and different to see them be very upfront with, like, this is what we're going to pay people. And I did a little bit of interesting math. I'm not a great math person, so don't super count me on this, but there is a website where you can, like, see, like, it's called, like, When Do I Earn Out? And it tells you kind of how many copies of the books you would have to sell in order to earn back your advance, and, like, how much your publisher is making gross revenue from the book while you are kind of earning out the advance. And I plugged in, like, the base amount for, like, different books and ebooks, if they were, like, all at 50% royalties, and, like, what would that be, and, like, what would the publisher make from that. And it was really interesting, because kind of the base level paperback payment, if you plug that in, like, what by the time the author earns out, what the publisher has made gross is $10,000. And so I wonder if that's where they kind of came up with that number, so that by the time the author earns out based on that 50% royalty rate, by the time they earn out, the publisher has basically made back exactly what they gave them in the advance amount. And then we start to earn the royalties, which is like 50% to the author, 25% to the bindery, 25% to the tastemaker. I just thought that was like interesting math, how that worked out. So I wondered if that was how they came up with that. But that is very different. Also, like the royalty rate is very, very different. At least from what I know of like big 5 publishers, because big 5 publishers kind of the standard rate that I've generally heard is like 10% for hardcovers, 7% for paperbacks, 25% for ebooks, 25% for audiobooks. And so those are kind of the standards. So like the difference between like 7% for a paperback and 50% for a paperback is very big. And they haven't said whether they're doing hardcovers or paperbacks or a mix or both or whatever. I'm just kind of guessing paperbacks. So leave that as it be. They haven't said whether they're doing one or the other. But I mean, that is a very significant royalty rate in comparison. And I'm not sure, again, if they're doing that all across the board or not. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more when I talk about questions I still have. But that is definitely different from traditional publishing that I know. I know some publishers, like some indie publishers or some other traditional publishers, will sometimes offer no advance and they'll offer higher royalties because they're not giving you an advance. So that's also something that exists. Another big difference is the way the reader engagement is being set up. And so I have seen some publishers who have allowed, readers or the public to like vote on which book cover they like the most. I have seen some publishers doing things like that. But the level of detail that they're talking about with launching this, of like even like picking the actual book that's being acquired, that is like very, very different and very interesting. And I'll talk about this more in potential incomes. I'm just trying to state the facts here. I have to keep reminding myself. I'm like, don't discuss in this portion. But that's also very different, that sort of section. Alongside this sort of tastemakers and people being able to just kind of come on board with their imprints. Because usually like a publisher is choosing to create an imprint. But in this case, like anyone that reaches that 500 memberships threshold can now be an imprint. And so you're kind of just like allowing anyone that can reach that threshold to now publish books with you, which is also a very different sort of model. And I wanted to leave off this section with a quote from Matt Kay from the Publishers Weekly article. And so it says, we view a world containing thousands of micro imprints as a return to the days of independent publishers leading the industry, taking risks, uncovering new voices, and igniting a passion among readers who want to see more creativity and diversity in the publishing ecosystem. Now we can get into some of these discussion bits now that I have set the stage of information of everything. So I wanted to chat a bit about kind of the potential outcomes that I thought of. I would also love to hear of like any potential outcomes that you think of. Please post them in the comments. I would love for this to be a discussion, to hear from other people, because this is a very interesting new thing to me, and I'd be very interested to see what people's thoughts and queries and quandaries, etc. are on it. But some of the potential outcomes, I did think this was very interesting in terms of thinking about authors who feel pressured to be on social media and produce on social media and to like try and create virality and to like try and be this big presence on social media, and feeling like very much that bit of promotion is falling to them. I do think there is a potential very positive outcome to coming into that industry with someone that already has a large platform on your side. And because they're picking your book, they're handpicking it with all of their followers, presumably they are going to really promote your book. They're really going to post about you, they're going to talk about you, they're going to include you in their stuff. And I think this is something where, like, of course, with like publishers, like the typical traditional publishers, you're like, well, you'll post about me too, right? Like you'll post about me and talk about me. But the thing is, because these publishers are so large and their platforms are very large, but because they are so large as a publisher, there's so many books, and books are kind of tiered marketing wise. And so really not everyone is actually getting posted about in that sort of platform. Whereas with this, partially because you're coming in from the ground up, but you're coming in from the ground up into promotion from someone who already has a large platform. And so I think that's potentially a very interesting outcome. I do also, however, on the flip side, I kind of wonder, because I think the Bindery is trying to pull from, you know, the fact that like TikTok and book talk rather and social media has been playing such a large part in the selling of books. Like we are seeing books that haven't been popular or really talked about for years suddenly getting these huge viral boosts, and it's because people are talking about them on social media and they're hyping them up and people are rediscovering them. But a lot of the benefit of that is from the organicness of it, and the fact that this is just someone that read the book and they loved it and they're talking about it, and why that doesn't work as well with like the authors doing that is because people are like, well, it's your book. And so I kind of wonder if influencers and content creators like getting a piece of that pie, like having a monetary slice of that, are people going to be like, oh, I don't feel like that's as authentic because of that. But at the same time, they picked that book. Like that book was in the slush, they picked it, they found it, and they loved it, and now they're getting a cut from loving it. So it's not as though like it was a book shoved at them that they were like, just promote this. So I'm kind of curious to see how that will come across to readers and audiences when this is being promoted. But I do see that like potential benefit of being an author and being like, okay, I'm brand new and nobody knows me, but right off the bat, I'm gonna get a promotion from this giant influencer that other publishers are sending money to in order to promote their own books, and I'm going to get that right off the bat just kind of as part of my package. Another potential benefit for authors is that standard advance size, and those, for traditional publishing, from what I know of traditional publishing royalties, very generous royalties, because I know people that are in traditional publishing that were published by the Big Five who did not get that much for their advances. And so there is a kind of potential competitive nature there. Some of the people, when they were talking about it on TikTok, they kind of positioned it as like, this could be great for people that might not otherwise be able to be traditionally published. But honestly, there are people that are traditionally published that do not get that much for their advance, as I said. So this is kind of a potential competitor in that way. And there are benefits to having an advance size that is that large, knowing you kind of have your built-in promotion for that. Mind you, there's sideways potential in that I don't really know much about Girl Friday Productions, so I don't really know how their marketing is or like how well they do that or that sort of thing. And so it's hard for me to speak on whether or not that's going to go well or not. And I think that's kind of an outcome that might be seen as potentially risky for some publishers, if they're not publishers, for some authors, if they're not really familiar with that section that is actually going to be doing the publishing segment. Especially when I think about the editor-author relationship, because the tastemaker is the one who's choosing your book, like the tastemaker and the reading and the readers, but you're going to be working with this editor who's a separate entity who you don't really necessarily know. So like, how is that editor-author relationship going to work in terms of editing the book? Because that's not the person that fell in love with your book. The tastemaker is the person that fell in love with your book. So I'm interested in how that dynamic is going to come together. So there's kind of like a flip of the coin there, in that there's like potentially some great benefits in terms of the advance size and the royalty size and that sort of thing, and the built-in promotion of the tastemaker. But there is a little bit more of a question mark when it comes to how that editorial relationship is going to work when that segment isn't necessarily involved in that initial process, as far as I know and can understand. I'm not sure, but I would hope that among the roster of editors that they have at Girl Friday Productions, that they would try and pair someone who was interested in that sort of book, in that sort of work. And I know I've talked a lot about potential outcomes for authors because I'm an author, but there's also some great potential outcomes here for readers, like being able to be involved, to be so involved in the process from that beginning stage to the end stage. It's not the same, but I think of like the Brandon Sanderson Kickstarter, like people getting to be involved and like to buy into that from an early stage, and then later to get these like packages of the books and feel like they're kind of part of the process. But this kind of even more directly, like you had a hand in picking this book, you like saw it come together over time, you had a hand in picking the cover, potentially the title, what have you. You're like very invested in this, and what that might mean and how that might, you know, change the reader's relationship with the book. I think that could be really interesting. And also readers kind of feeling like they have a little bit more sway in the books that are coming into the world and that they're participating in that in some way. I think that's also really interesting. And then also for the tastemakers, for the content creators themselves, like there's also the interesting outcome of like being able to be compensated for their work, as well as being able to participate in that reader way of like, I am part of the process of this book and I am curating the books that are come into the world in a certain way, and that I'm also getting to participate in that, but I'm also being compensated for the work that I'm doing in promoting this and helping bring this to the world. I'm sorry if the lighting is different, my camera died and then it got cloudy. Anyway, moving right along, the last outcome I wanted to talk about is kind of what the fact that like there's kind of a number threshold, like you hit 500 members and then you can become an imprint, what this means for what the Bindery calls its mission as like, you know, having a diverse amount of, you know, kind of books and that sort of thing. And I assume also creators. I wonder about that, because if it becomes a numbers game at that point, are we going to see what we see on other social media platforms, which is that like marginalized people struggle in the algorithm and don't get picked up as much and don't get as much exposure. And so I wonder how that's going to translate with this platform, if we're going to end up seeing the same thing, if it's just like reach this numbers threshold to do this thing. And I kind of wonder if they're going to mitigate that in any way. Like, are they still going to be handpicking some influencers and like, you know, contacting them and being like, hey, would you like to do an imprint with us? Or are they going to have something within platform that they use for that? Because it kind of seems like they just want it to run itself. Like you hit this amount, you get done, you publish your books, etc., etc. So I wonder if that's been made a consideration at all. I hope they will, but I guess they're just going to kind of see what happens when things kind of start going in. And of course, it's becoming sunny now. Anyway, that was something I wondered about. But again, there's kind of the outcomes I'm talking about here are all obviously completely sort of hypotheticals, but I do think that there are like, you know, some potential positive outcomes, some potential negative outcomes, but we're not really going to see until it actually comes to fruition. Obviously, this is just kind of speculation, but I am more interested in the positive ones because I do think this is such an interesting, fun, new thing, and I would like to see it kind of be a positive thing that comes together, but we will see. And then to round this out, I'm going to talk about some of the lingering questions that I still have. I have a lot of questions. Really, we only have a very small amount of information. They're not like launching this platform until August, so I'm sure once it gets launched, a lot of these questions will be answered, or maybe at least some of these questions will be answered, or like more things will come to light, especially as agents start sending things out, etc. But these are kind of like the off the top questions that I have to begin with. And if you have any things that you're interested in like seeing answered, of course, I will not be able to answer them. I won't know, but for discussion's sake and putting it out there, you know, drop that in the comments. But my first kind of round of questions is in regard to this kind of standard advance. I'm very curious about how this is going to function. So for one, I'm assuming per book, but I'm not sure, but like, how are they going to, like, what if it's a series? Like, are they going to buy all the series up front? Or are they going to buy one and then kind of see what happens? But if you're going to buy one and see what happens, what if that book does really well? Are they going to offer higher advances when books do well, like the way a traditional publisher might do that? Or are they going to always be like, no, we always do a base of 10,000? Or that base of 10,000 up front, can that be negotiated in any way? When literary agents submit their authors, if they're like, yeah, we want to publish this book, can the literary agent be like, can we get a little bit more money? Like, are they going to bump that up? And what happens, like, you know, I assume agents are still going to do simultaneous submissions. So what happens if they offer and then another publisher offers? Then you could potentially have the literary agent be like, okay, now it's an auction. Is Bindery going to participate in auctions? Or are they always going to be like, we're not going above 10,000, so we have to kind of automatically fold? I'm interested in seeing how that will function. But also I'm interested in the payment terms, because in traditional publishing, at least from what I am aware, you don't usually get that whole amount of money up front. They're not going to get the full $10,000 right off the bat. Usually you get like a portion on signing, a portion on delivery and acceptance, which is when you like finish the book. You're basically almost finished. And so the most favorable split that I can think of would be 50% upon signing, 50% upon delivery and acceptance. But some publishers split advances quite a bit. So they do upon signing, upon delivery and acceptance, upon the publication of the book, a year out from the publication of the book, or like when the paperback is published, if it was published as hardback originally. I'm interested to see kind of how that breakdown is. Really, I want to see like a contract, but I imagine that they're not going to freely make their contracts available. But I am kind of interested in those sorts of like nitty-gritty breakdown things regarding how that advance is going to come together. I'm also curious about if the tastemakers are going to be allowed to have some sort of editorial feedback or some sort of editorial input. From their website, it seems like they are not going to, just kind of the way they put things together. I'll put up, they have kind of like a graphic where they're like showing the process and like what the tastemaker is going to be involved in and like what the publisher editorial is going to do. And like based on that, it kind of seems like the tastemaker is not going to be involved in the editorial process. But I am interested if that's something that might change, because I guess I'm picturing a scenario in which a tastemaker chooses the book to be published and then it goes off to editorial. And what if editorial makes a significant change and the tastemaker is like, oh, I hate that. Or like, why did we cut this? That I love that part of the book so much. Like, I kind of wonder how much that's going to feed into it, because it also reflects on the tastemaker's brand. So like if the book significantly changes from when they were like thumbs up, let's acquire it, to when it comes to this final result, then that's kind of on the tastemaker's brand. And then they're now promoting something that may not have been what they thought it was going to be. And I think about that, you know, I think in typical traditional publishing, the person that buys the book is your editor, and the person that publishes the book is your editor. And so the person that's working on the book with you is the same person that fell in love with your book and bought it. But in this case, it's a little bit different. And so I'm very interested. I have many questions around how that dynamic is going to work. But I mean, publishers do similar things. Like if you are in typical traditional publishing and your editor leaves, you might get put with a different editor who isn't the original person that fell in love with your project, but they kind of try and pair you as best as they can. Though I do know that I know a lot of people where that has not gone over well for them. So I'm just like, I'm very curious about that whole dynamic. So that's certainly a question I have, is like, is the tastemaker going to be able to have some input? Sure, it's certainly not to like veto the author's work, but at least to be like, hey, I love that part. Like, why did we take that out? Or is there any way we can put that back in? Something like that. And those are the questions I'm going to limit it to, because I could go on forever with questions about this. But that's really it. So I did as much as I could in like kind of explaining everything that I know and what seems to be going on. There will be more information in August when it launches, I assume, of course, and I'm looking forward to seeing more. But I think in general, I do think this is something really cool and something that's kind of a fun new thing. I do really like when publishing tries out new stuff. Like, it's such a like, you know, ingrained industry that it can kind of be like, you know, doing the same thing for a very long time. And so it's kind of interesting to see these sorts of innovations being made, especially, you know, considering things like technology, like the fact that Patreon is a thing that exists, and like the fact that Book Talk is something that's kind of like taken off and like had an impact on the industry. And I think the reaction we've kind of seen from publishing up until now has kind of been like, somehow we gotta make it go viral on Book Talk, which isn't like something that can necessarily work, but certainly some more targeted things such as like investing in book talk influencers and like sending out to those influencers and like trying to get the word out that way. And so this feels like a new interesting way to blend that, and so I'm very curious to see what kind of comes from it and like to see what titles will be published and all of that. So I'm looking forward to learning more about the Bindery. But yeah, in the comments, drop whatever comments you have to make about this. What do you think about it? You might have noticed things that I didn't notice. I might have missed information that you have. So like, let's get in the comments and let's chat about it. And I guess that's really it. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.